Well, it's great to spend some time with you today, and today's topic is probably one on which I've spoken more frequently than any other topic. And given the fact that I've done over 500 seminars like this, this would say something when I tell you that this is probably not only the most frequent point in my discussions, but also probably the one that is nearest and dearest to my heart. And that's because relationships between council and senior managers are absolutely critical to the success of any municipality. If you have a healthy, wholesome relationship, and I'll talk about what that looks like in a few minutes, you ought to pat yourselves on the back and think about what you're doing well and continue to do it. Because this relationship of council-manager is critical to your success as a municipality. Relationship is either healthy, and most folks will know what that looks like, or it needs to be corrected. And I'll guarantee you that the worst possible thing that you can do is simply set it aside and hope that it gets better over time. Because the answer is it won't unless you take some preemptive steps to correct the relationship and to make it the way it ought to be. Otherwise, that relationship will hinder the effectiveness of your municipality, and that's obviously not in your best interest. There's only one key relationship in the organization, and that's the relationship between council and its chief administrative officer, the CAO, in some cases called the town or county manager, city manager. In other cases, I know in the far north of Canada, it's the senior administrative officer. But when I say CAO, it's the chief administrative officer. And that relationship between council and the CAO is absolutely central. It's not to say, by the way, that the relationships the council has with other senior managers is not important, because they are. And those relationships are formed over time. It can often be on a fairly casual basis where you can walk into the office and check with each person, see how they're doing and so on. But the relationship with the CAO is in actual fact the relationship that I think drives the tone of the whole organization. Because where the relationship between council and CAO founders, so too does the whole organization. That relationship is central to much of what happens throughout the organization. And that's why it's referred to as the tone at the top, which is kind of a catchy phrase, tone at the top, one that's used in both the private sector as well as public sector circles. And it refers to the kind of style, it refers to the tone, it refers to the degree of respect, it refers to a lot of things in terms of the relationships between council as the governing body and the chief administrative officer and manager. The question is there trust and respect between council and its chief administrative officer, or is that relationship more one of disbelief and no confidence? You know, the kind of relationship where you're constantly asking, is that all the information you have? Is there something you're hiding from us? Is there information behind the scenes? When you say this in a report, do you really mean it? If those words come out of your mouth in the course of a council meeting, I'll guarantee you that the relationship is not as it should be. The relationship should be based on trust and respect, or the organization itself will suffer. You cannot afford to have other staff, other senior staff members skirt the CAO, go around the CAO on their way to council on the basis that what we're trying to just do is have the most direct path to council. When in actual fact, what happens is that whether wittingly or not, they will undermine the relationship that council needs to have with its CAO. The only time that route should be taken, where you as a council to speak directly to the department heads or sub-department heads, if you have a large enough municipality, is where that's been okayed by the chief administrative officer, and it's clear to the chief administrative officer that you as a council and he or she have an agreement that says that this contact directly with a department head is acceptable. Otherwise, you going around the CAO to the department head on the basis that this is a quicker way to the answer is often, by the way, undermining the respect and the role of the CAO, and that's not healthy. It's not healthy for you, and it's certainly not healthy for the department heads in the long run. Similarly, the CAO has to make it clear to the council and to the department heads and to the rest of the organization that the appropriate route to council is through the CAO. So any reports, and I find this quite interesting, by the way, when I do studies, because I'll often ask for a copy of the agenda package on the one hand and a copy of the organization chart on the other. The organization chart says that the only person reporting direct to council is the CAO, and in actual fact, the agenda package, which includes reports from management, shows that the Director of Finance is sending a report to Mayor and Council. So I step back and I ponder and I think, so which one is it? Does the Department Head of Finance report to the Council, or does the Finance Head report through to the CAO as per the organization chart? Interesting. You say, well, it's not a big deal. We've kind of encouraged department heads to write directly to council. Yeah, it is a big deal. It simply shows that you're prepared to undermine this critical relationship. So trying to do otherwise, trying to have a relationship that's based on skirting this path to council should be stopped in its tracks. If you're a department head and you're listening to this, simply adjust. Just say to yourself, would I prefer to have my employees go past me on their way to the CAO? It's a pretty easy question. After all, that's the style you use if you go by the CAO on your way to council. So just ask yourself, would the same thing, the same rules apply to me? And of course, the answer in almost every instance is going to be no. You'd never have them do that. They would send their reports up through you as the department head. Well, then apply the same degree of respect and protocol to your own position. It's not that the council members can't have a good, healthy relationship with management, should be able to greet them casually, should be able to stop by if a council member is visiting the council, the chambers, or visiting at town office on an hopefully irregular basis, that stopping in a department head's office and shooting the breeze and saying hello and how's the family, all of that's quite frankly quite acceptable. The key is to make sure that you are absolutely holding this council manager dichotomy, this council manager relationship in high regard and high respect. Building that relationship takes time. It takes time to work on it. It takes time to build, and it takes one instance to destroy. So you need to reflect on that in terms of how do we, as a council, build the kind of relationship that we want to have with our CAO. Council should be open to discussing that relationship at least annually when you do your review of the CAO, which in some jurisdictions is required to be done on an annual basis. In other jurisdictions, it's more permissive. You're allowed to do it on an annual basis. I would argue that that's a bare minimum. I would argue that council ought to be discussing the CAO's performance on a much more frequent basis so that it becomes one of no surprise when you have the actual formal appraisal. But at the same time, when you're having that discussion, the relationship needs to be on the table in terms of how has that been, how is it being seen by the CAO, and so on. The kind of social contact, which I think is appropriate, should be the contact that you have in the office on an informal, casual drop-in basis. Should be the relationship that you might have in terms of the Christmas function, the annual summer agricultural function, the staff awards dinner, whatever, those kinds of relationships. They're all important, and they also encourage a degree of social camaraderie, and I think that is to be encouraged. So develop a relationship, develop one based on respect. Make sure you keep at arm's length. This person is not your best friend. They aren't your best buddy to go fishing with, bowling with on the same curling team, all of that. The CAO is to be a position held at arm's length, but viewed obviously with respect. So if you're looking at developing the relationship, I think it's important that you think through what that relationship should look like. And so let's talk about some solid steps in terms of building the relationship. Number one, respect the differences. Understand that there are differences, and make sure that you build that relationship between council and manager. And again, you need to build it on a day-by-day, month-by-month, year-by-year basis because it is absolutely critical. Respect the fact that there are differences. Respect the fact that you got elected to your position as council. The CAO and management got appointed to their position based on their training and expertise. Not to say that you don't have expertise in some of your own backgrounds and so on, the occupations that you hold, Simply that in terms of running a municipality, you're elected on the basis of winning the popularity contest called an election. The CAO and the staff are there because they've been chosen through a process that focused in on experience and focused in on academic training. So you need to respect that difference. You need to respect the professionalism of your staff. You need to understand that staff are there to provide first-class, first-rate professional advice, that if you're going to be making good quality decisions, you need to have good advice coming directly to council. That part is critical. It's important that you get professional, apolitical advice, i.e. not tinged by politics. That's your basis, not the basis for the CAO. Thirdly, don't denigrate your CAO or department heads in public. If you've got any criticism of your manager or your senior staff, that kind of criticism should be voiced in an in-camera session, should be handled under personnel matters, and should not be discussed in public where the public can hear you speak poorly of your own senior staff. Fourthly, don't interfere with staff. Ensure that the staff are given guidance by the CAO and then are given some flexibility and permission to make decisions on their own without your direct interference. So don't be stopping by work sites and providing guidance as to how deep the hole should be, how it should or should not be shored up, how to drive the tractor or the grader. All of that information is presumably provided by your own senior managers in-house and doesn't require you to be providing that useful advice, in your opinion, on the job site. Simply stay away from that. Fifth, make sure that you're comfortable disagreeing with each other. Make sure that you understand that being a team player, being a person that works with between council and management doesn't mean that you absolutely have to have a relationship based on total agreement. I would argue that often the best council and management relationships that I've seen have some form of what I call constructive tension, where there are times when the CAO will report to council and advise on a particular matter, knowing that a majority of council may not agree. But quite frankly, from a professional point of view, what's being put on the table to that person makes the best professional advice. That simply means you've got to be grown up enough to accept the fact that disagreement in a healthy relationship is always possible. You need, number 6, to be working together on developing a common vision. Common vision says that you as a council and the management team are together when you talk about setting strategic direction, when you talk about the vision of the municipality, when you talk about what's important in terms of priorities. All of that should be a combined effort between council and management, with obviously council having the final say in terms of what those priorities look like. Point 7 is that you need to respect the rules. You need to avoid conflict situations. You ought not to be asking staff to hide any of your own personal failures. You as a council member need to be aware of what's permitted, what isn't, and therefore don't draw your staff into that kind of situation. Stay well clear of it. Don't expect them to cover up problems because they're not your buddies and friends. They're professional staff. Their job is to do their own work within the parameters given to them both by legislation and by job descriptions. I'm going to stop and just simply talk briefly about what I see as some of those critical factors in a relationship between council and manager, and then I'm going to go on to talking about what are some of the keys to that relationship. So in terms of critical factors in a council-CAO relationship, first, I think it's important that you make sure that you've defined the position expectations. Some of that's defined for you probably in your legislation. Some of it should be found in your position description that you have for the position. You need to make sure that that position description is up to date. And you need to also make sure that as a council, when you're hiring a CAO, you're talking about what do we actually expect out of the job? What is the kind of style that we think is appropriate? So number 1, you need to define position expectations. Secondly, I think you need to talk about what the position authorities are. So what does that mean? Well, it's a question of what power and authority does a CAO have to make ultimate decisions. Do you expect the CAO to bring every decision to you as a council? Quite frankly, if that's the case, you're probably going to end up hiring somebody that's quite timid, quite weak, enjoys working in a style that doesn't require any management. It's more a question of may I, And council has this great enjoyable style of continually leaning in and telling the manager how to manage. If that's the case, you ought to express that, by the way, during a recruitment process, because that style would turn off most of the managers that I know, and they would withdraw their candidacy knowing that that's a game breaker as far as they're concerned. You need to make sure that the position is defined. What power and authority does your CAO have to expend funds? What power and authority does your CAO have to move budget amounts around within budget parameters? What authority does your CAO have in terms of carrying out council decisions the day after a council meeting? What authority does your CAO have within the legislated requirements to make decisions? What areas do you expect the CAO to come to you with in terms of asking for council's guidance? And at the end of the day, what's your comfort level in terms of the CAO making decisions? I remember when I worked at one time in the health field, the parameters of a CEO in the health field range from $50,000 per expenditure for one CEO, and in the same health system, and obviously a larger center, the CEO's authority to spend money was limited to any expenditure under $1 million. Well, it's quite a range, and when you think about it, any expenditure under $1 million covers an awful lot of expenditures, and thus the board needed to be comfortable with somebody having that degree of authority. So make sure you define. Point one is define the position expectations. Point two, in terms of a good council relationship, is to define the authority with that position. The third is to define the clarity of reporting, which I talked about just in the last point. But obviously, one of the key things in terms of clarity of reporting speaks to on what issues do you expect the CAO to report? Where do you expect to see regularity on a council agenda? And then second part of that is how frequently. How frequently should the CAO be meeting with the mayor in terms of a briefing? How frequently should the CAO brief council as a whole? And how frequently should the CAO be appearing at a committee of council, presuming that you utilize some form of committee system? The fourth factor in terms of a council-CAO relationship pertains to the involvement by council with your administration. So what is the guiding principles? What's the protocols that you've established that guide your council in terms of its involvement on a day-to-day basis with your staff? Are council members by protocol or by policy directed to go direct to the CAO's office and stop there? Are councilors directed by protocol that if they have a question on the street or at home, by email or by telephone or whatever form of communication, are they to pass that to the CAO only, or do they refer that to the appropriate department head? What protocol do you have? Or, for example, do you as a council feel that you're entitled to go past the department head level and speak to somebody in the bowels of the organization to try to get at the right answer? What's the protocol in terms of clarity of reporting and in terms of involvement with the administration? Is it also clear that we have a protocol around the degree of social contact between members of council and members of senior administration? What kind of contact is permissible in your organization? The fifth part of the council management relationship is to ensure that the foundations are clearly established. And the foundations include this point that I made earlier about clear expectations. Secondly, that we base our relationship on trust and respect. Thirdly, that we expect courteous and respectful service, not only to the public, but also to members of council on the basis that we're all equal. Fourth, that we expect from the CAO professional, apolitical advice. Fifth, that we expect to be conducting regular performance reviews. These are not surprises. They're scheduled typically around 2 weeks either side of the CAO's date of appointment, unless that lands on Christmas Day, and then obviously you'll be shifting it. By the way, doing a performance review is best scheduled well before Christmas or probably 3 to 4 weeks afterwards, simply to avoid the window around Christmas time when most of your feelings will be juggled somewhat by the impact of a good or expensive Christmas. Next, you would expect to have comprehensive and concurrent policy information from your CAO on a regular basis. That information should be clear, it should be direct, it should be provided to you on a regular, ongoing basis. And finally, there should be, in terms of a foundation to the council-CAO relationship, there should be a monitoring of the role boundaries. So what role does the CAO play? What role do you play? And who monitors the area of flux between council and the CAO? You also need to look at what are the sources of discord between council and management. And the sources of discord pertain, of course, to the fact that you're involved in local government, which is often quite different from that of the private sector. So that can cause any number of challenges. If you're a person that gets into council, you're a business person, and you are not used to dealing in public sector, you're going to find the process and timing of decision making to be somewhat glacial in speed. And as a result of that, you are probably going to be frustrated from time to time. That's a source of discord between council and management, to be sure. You might also look at what are some of the relationship issues on a day-to-day basis. What impact does that have on how we treat each other? Have we talked about issues that come up that prove to be issues of strife and turmoil and discord? That's an important consideration. And part of that, in my mind, should be controlled by a council-CAO covenant, which talks about the relationship between council and the CAO, sets out the rules and responsibilities that a council has vis-a-vis the CAO, and it also at the same time has a declaration that I, the CAO, will respond in certain ways to the demands of the council. So council-CAO covenant is critical. If you're not sure what that looks like, I've written about that in Municipal World magazine. There are 2 or 3 articles back to back on that same topic. I encourage you to pick that up and to read that through. You should be able to define those points. You should be able to sign them off as a council, and you should be able to sign that off as a CAO. The CAO control mechanisms, if we give all this authority to our chief administrative officer, if we give all this authority to that person on a day-to-day basis, how do we know that the person won't exceed their bounds of authority? How do we know that the person will not disappoint us in terms of the power and authority that we provide to the CAO? And part of that, of course, is to make sure that you've got a bylaw that's clear, that sets out the parameters in clear detail. You have a position description that is well defined. It clearly sets out the prerogatives and the parameters of the CAO. You have a position profile that's hopefully been developed so that if you are in the position of having to recruit a new CAO, you've got a profile that describes the job. You have a CAO contract between council and the CAO or the manager that also sets out the responsibilities in a contract form. And then you have 2 other mechanisms that allow you to assess the relationship. One is how does the organization perform on an ongoing basis? That's certainly an indicator. And a second indicator is your performance review of the CAO. So what should underline that relationship? It should be underlined by your commitment to working with each other, your commitment to respecting each other, which is evidenced in terms of how we communicate and non-interference and ongoing work responsibilities. A further key is your commitment to understanding what does the legislation say vis-a-vis the power and authority of a CAO. What does it say we're entitled to do? What does it say that the CAO is responsible for, so that we know the grounds on which the CAO has their position defined, and we also respect the fact that that's defined by legislation. So council members' roles ought to be spelled out, and they will be in your legislation, as will the powers and authority of the CAO. You also need to respect what brought council and staff to the dance. What got you to the proverbial dance is your ability to campaign, your ability to connect with the fellow residents, your ability to encourage one another on the street, to meet on the street, your ability to be involved in various service clubs, perhaps minor sport activities, all of which says to the community that you're passionate, you're concerned about the community, and you're willing to be involved on that level. That's what got you elected. What got the CAO to their position is obviously not those same criteria. You want a CAO, by the way, that can engage the public, that can be involved in the community, is seen regularly at social events, but the CAO's entree to their position is not based on those factors at all. It's based on the ability of the CAO in terms of their academic performance, the degree or the discipline that they've had behind them in terms of university or college education. It's based on the experience that they've had in other levels of organizations before they became a CAO. They may become a CAO in a smaller municipality and they've had that experience. That's what has you hiring a CAO. All of the other social aspects notwithstanding, can the person do the job and do they understand the job parameters? So those things are important in terms of council having a respect for the CAO. The respect results in confidence, and the confidence results in council being able to step back from this day-to-day involvement, or at least the desire to be involved on a day-to-day basis, and to say to the CAO, you have our ultimate confidence. We respect the fact that you can manage. We know that you're keen about this particular position in this community, and we have a sufficient confidence that we're not going to get involved on a day-to-day basis. We've delegated that to you. We trust you and your ability to do it. At the same time, you have a CAO that respects council. And the CAO's respect for council is communicated in any number of ways, but certainly shows up in how the CAO responds to questions at a council meeting, responds to how a CAO responds to questions either electronically or in written form or verbal form. How does the CAO respond? How courteous are they? It shows up in how they handle social and casual contact. All of that shows respect for the role of council. And the CAO plays a particular role in enabling council to lead. Many ways, an election is not only a judgment on the performance of council, it's a judgment on the performance of the CAO. Has the CAO been competent? Has the CAO been sufficiently professional in their advice to council to help council, quote, look good? So that when a council is thrashed at the election polls, it often speaks to whether or not the administration has done a good job of briefing council, assisting council with its agenda, telling council that maybe they're going off the tracks in a certain area. All of that's a reflection on the total relationship. So CAO needs to help council lead. And then there needs to be an ongoing monitoring of the relationship. The relationship, like a marriage, needs to have constant attention. And without that kind of constant attention, you can have real challenges, real struggles in the organization. So there has to be an ongoing basis of attention being paid to the relationship between council and its chief administrative officer. These relationships need to be monitored, and you need to be watching for signs of fraying in the relationship. So what does this message look like in real life? How does this play out in communities across Canada? Does not everybody understand that council has its role and CAO has his or her role, and never the twain shall meet, and everybody abides by their particular roles and they all get along swimmingly? Council comes in every 2 weeks to a council meeting, attends the odd committee meeting, nods respectfully at the CAO on the way in and on the way out, has the odd casual conversation, might phone for a piece of advice or a piece of information before a council meeting. Isn't that the way all councils do this? I recall in one instance working with in a health region, and I was spending time talking to them about the importance of doing performance review of their CEO in their case, CAO in yours, and talked about how it's critical that they as a board adopt a particular style of doing the performance review, look at particular spheres of responsibility when they talk about what the CAO is supposed to be doing, and to look at both the tangibles as well as the intangibles of the relationship, the issues that are subjective, the issues that are objective. All of that, I went through the whole song and dance, and I remember making the point that members of the board, including the chair, should have a respectful but not necessarily friendly relationship with the CEO. And there was a number of side glances in the room, number of smirks and almost laughter. And by the time I finished my little song and dance, we stood around and had a coffee. And I spoke to somebody, or somebody came up to me and said, "You probably noticed people glancing around nervously." And I said, "Yeah, I did." And they said, "Well, the reason they were a bit nervous is that this past 2 weeks, the chair of our board and his wife and the CEO of our health organization, our health board, and her husband had just spent the past 2 weeks on a vacation cruise together. And now having come back, the first day back, I'm in talking about the importance of doing a board CEO performance review on the basis of no bias, no friendships, no personal relationship, just trust and respect. So in actual fact, what I was preaching had just been absolutely turned around completely 180 degrees by the relationship of this chair and this CEO. I had a chat with both of them afterwards and pointed out that it's impossible for an organization to expect this to be a performance review that's balanced, that's fair, when in actual fact everybody in the organization knew that the two of them had been out vacationing together, not having a dinner together out, not attending a social function at the same time and showing up by accident. In actual fact, deliberately planning holidays together. The second instance, another municipality that I recall working in, the mayor and the CAO had heard all of my sermons, I'm sure, about the need to have separation, respect in council chambers and in the office and so on, and to not be overly engaged with one another other than in a business-like relationship as mayor and CAO. And then I find out that the mayor and the CAO, along with the two staff members, I think it was, in a neighboring municipality, that got together, formed a land development and real estate company. We're all partners in it, all had signing authority, and we're all in the process of buying up land and houses and turning them into rental properties. So now you've got a mayor who's supposed to be doing a performance review on the CAO in a business relationship with the CAO that absolutely depends on the two of them keeping on friendly terms, doing their best to bring in a profit and so on, sharing delicate information about land prices and housing prices in the neighboring community. And this person is supposed to be doing a performance review next Monday of the CAO with a straight face. It's impossible. So having a personal business relationship is also a non-starter, at least it should be considered that way. A third instance that comes to my mind is the mayor who had just recently become mayor. She came out of a professional background, understood management, understood business, and thought her job was to help manage the organization. And so not only was she going to be the mayor, but she was also going to be the manager. And so the mayor shows up at the Monday morning CAO department head meeting and says to the chief administrative officer, well, do you mind if I sit in on your department head meeting? I'm not going to interfere, I just thought I'd see how these things go. Well, immediately, there's two answers, of course. Number one is, no, you can't stop, which means you better get your resume out because you're soon to be fired. Or you say, sure, you can stop in and hope for the best. The person says, sure, you can sit in, and pulls up a chair, and she says, no, I'll just sit off to the side here and just watch and see how things go. Well, if you're any person at all with a degree of intellect and wisdom, you'll know that your very presence in the same room is going to change the tone of the meeting. The meeting that would normally have been quite candid, normally have been sort of people exchanging views on key issues about what would council say about this. You know, I think we better buff up that report a bit because I'm sure Councillor X is not going to like it and so on. That kind of exchange which would go on at a department head meeting was absolutely null and void at this one because the mayor has decided to sit in and witness how a, quote, normal department head meeting would be held. The chair, by the way, that the mayor was in, that was off to the side of the management table, well, the next meeting the chair was a wee bit closer to the table. By about the third meeting, the chair was actually at the table. And by the fourth meeting, the mayor had managed to get her chair all the way around to the head of the table, and the CAO is now sitting off to the left of the table. So you see, in 3 or 4 meetings, the mayor had decided, I can run this place. I can be the manager. We'll keep paying the manager the high salary that we do, and I'll relegate the manager to the dustbin because the staff will see me taking over. After all, I'm the mayor. And having been elected, that absolutely gave me all the skills and experience, didn't it, in terms of being a CAO? Folks, I'm afraid not. So if you come from a province where you're actually allowed to have a politician in the role of the CAO, have the mayor and the CAO be one and the same person, you'll end up with either a neutered mayor or a neutered CAO or a neutered both. but I'll guarantee you the situation won't be healthy. So don't write and tell me about how great it is and how you've actually made it work in your community. I've had those emails, and I've also had people respond a year later to confess that it didn't work. And lo and behold, they finally figured out why. These are absolutely two separate roles. And then just one other little story just to let you know that you're probably a lot better off than most. I recall the situation where the council had hired a new manager, a new CAO, person that had some years of experience, therefore should have known better. At times, both your brains and maturity leave the room at the same time. Your degree of intelligence approximates room temperature. The gene pool has had a higher level of toxicity than you ever thought existed. All of those things pertain. And so now you've got a CAO that goes to the council chamber, sits with council through a meeting. Very first council meeting had just been introduced to the community in the previous week's newspaper. After the meeting, decides to repair with the councillors over to the Legion to help the profitability of the Legion. Sits down and has a few swallies along with the members of council and the mayor. And of course, after a while, the wise and mature members of council get up and filter out, say their goodbyes. The mayor and the CAO decide to continue on with the profitability of the Legion and stay to virtually the bitter end. And at the end of far too many swallies, they get up and leave. And the mayor heads off to his house, knowing, of course, where it was in the countryside, because after all, he lived there for 30 years. And the CAO, who had just rented this property about a week previously, heads up the road to his property, gets up to the gate of the property and turns left off the highway, which was the first mistake because his property that he rented was to the right. Well, as Paul Harvey once said, and now the rest of the story, well, you could guess that. Ends up in the wrong house, in the wrong bedroom, which was totally unoccupied, the house that is, and the bedroom, until the actual owners of the home came home, only to discover that there's somebody, Papa Bear, sleeping in the wrong bed, and the husband goes in, finds the guy spread eagled on the bed, hadn't taken his boots or clothes off, looks at the face and thinks, I've seen you somewhere before, and realizes it was in last week's newspaper announcing the new CAO. Just to cut the story a little bit short and to say that the career and the story were both shortened by the episode, and the CAO was finally pointed in the right direction in terms of alcohol counseling. So can these things happen? Absolutely. Should they happen? No. Should the relationship be sound? Yes. So let's press on and talk about some good key principles of what this relationship is all about. Principle one is clear expectations. What does that mean? It simply means that we've absolutely set out the roles and responsibilities. They've been clarified, they've been written. People can find that for the mayor and councillors. They can find that for the chief administrative officer. Roles have been written in terms of committees. They're written in terms of the senior management team. All of those roles need to be recorded so that when you have an orientation process for a new council, you receive information on what do our roles look like as a council. Principle number two is the respect for this one employee. If you as a council think that all your department heads also report to council, in my mind you're in for a major downfall. You're going to be sadly mistaken, because if all the department heads and the CEO reporting to council, you'll have confusion. You'll have a relationship based on mistrust. You'll have a relationship that's based on a lack of role clarity, and a variety of issues and challenges will exist. And I've dealt with a whole series of them from one side of this country to the other. Principle three is adhering to trust and respect. Without those two key pillars, trust in the word of each person on council and in the word of the CAO, and respect for the role each plays, without those key pillars, the proverbial house will fall down. So you as a council need to be able to show it, and you should be able to receive it from your CAO. Principle 4 talks about the personal relationship that you have to the CAO. This is your chief hired gun. This is the person that's going to carry out the will of council. This is the person that needs to be held at arm's length. This is not your drinking buddy. This is not the person you play chess with every Thursday over the noon hour. It's not that you avoid social contact, You just don't manufacture reasons to have social contact. Now, when you're going on holidays, go with your family, your other friends, don't take the CAO. And by the way, I've seen it done, and it's been done to the great misfortune, typically, by the way, of the CAO. If you're going to be doing a performance review of the CAO, you have a great difficulty in keeping a straight face and being without bias if in fact you're bosom buddies. It simply doesn't happen. Principle 5 is that when you have complaints about the behavior of a council member, that you're prepared to deal with those complaints in a forthright basis. You're prepared to ensure that any complaint that's verbalized to you as a council with regard to the mayor or with regard to another member of council is acted upon, and the council deals with those complaints on an absolutely quick and expedient basis. There's no other option to that. Principle 6 is what I call the system of no surprises. Council members do not want to be surprised by issues that come to their table, to their attention. They want to know, when did we find out about this and why weren't we informed? Well, if it's a key issue in the community, and obviously that requires some judgment by your CAO, but if it's a key issue, then you as a council and manager need to sit down and talk about what defines key issues, what defines those issues that we expect to be briefed on the moment they hear. And by the way, if they're troublesome to the CAO, there's a problem in the organization, the CAO is having to fire a particular staff member because of misbehavior, then that also can become a major problem. Principle 7 says that we ensure that council's skill development is kept up through ongoing attendance at courses. We also ensure that our CAO's skill development is also maintained through attendance at conferences that deal with how to be an effective manager. Principle 8 is that we have agreed to embrace a sound decision-making process that ensures that issues that come up through the organization, that go past the department head level, that have been discussed by department heads in the CAO, have been eventually presented to council, that those issues will result in a comprehensive, sound decision. And as a result of that, you can have confidence that the decision-making process, i.e. getting an issue from the starting point to a concluding point, has been sufficiently comprehensive and exhaustive to ensure that the decision you're making is a good and correct decision. Principle 9 talks about concurrent information. It says that the CAO and department heads, when they're getting information to council and to the mayor, will release the information to all members of council at exactly the same time, so that no member of council should be at a council meeting thinking, gee, some of the other councilors seem to understand this issue better than I do. It's obvious that they had better access to the information than I have. What kind of briefing package did they have, or what kind of briefing session did they have with the mayor and the mayor's office that I wasn't privy to? That kind of question should not come up in your organization. The principle of concurrent information says that you as a council all receive information at the same time. Principle 10 says that we will monitor how well this relationship is working. We will absolutely ensure that the relationship is monitored on an ongoing basis, that any sign of it being frayed will be discussed by council. The mayor will sit down with the CAO in a private session and make sure that the CAO is aware of the troubles that the mayor and the council have seen, aware of the difficulties, aware of the signs that things aren't going as they should be, so that you're not waiting for a performance review time. You're actually taking a very clear and decisive stance relative to any performance issues long before your annual performance appraisal. So ensure that you're paying attention to role boundaries and ensure that you're paying attention to how that relationship should work. So let me sum up the great psalm, the Psalm 90, verse 12. The psalmist says, "So teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom." That to me is a good psalm, because it says to us, we're only here for a limited period of time. We need to make sure that we're doing absolutely our best to not only be teachable, but to show that we are teachable, and therefore that we can be discerning and wise in our policy choices. You are representing all the best of your community. You are representing all the citizens of your community. Your job is to make sure that you're making decisions that are absolutely wise and based on good foundational principles. May God bless you as you continue on your governance journey.